Is Gambia on a path to turmoil? After conceding defeat, President Yahya Jammeh has now changed his mind and is rejecting the result of the presidential election. What are the hurdles to a smooth transition of power? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. He's reputed to be one of the world's most repressive and eccentric leaders who vowed to rule Gambia for 1 billion years, if God willed. Following the presidential election 10 days ago, Yahya Jammeh shocked many by accepting defeat to his rival Adama Barrow. Jammeh's conciliation was seen as the start of a new era of democracy in the smallest nation in mainland Africa. Now, though, it appears that Jammeh won't be relinquishing power after all. Will his demand for a new election mean turmoil for the country, and how can a peaceful transfer of power be achieved? Those questions we'll be putting to our guests right after our report from Mohammed Val.
1 week after his acceptance of defeat, Gambian President Yahya Jammeh now says the election was rigged and the vote should be repeated.
I hereby announce to you Gambians my total rejection of the electoral results, and thereby annulling the elections in its entirety. And until we will go back to the polls, because I want to make sure that every Gambian has voted.
The announcement drew prompt condemnation from the US government and defiance from the president-elect.
The outgoing president has no constitutional authority to reject the result of the election and order for fresh election to be held. The IEC is the only competent authority to announce the results of election and declare a winner. It was already done so, and I am now the president-elect.
Barrow has called on his supporters to remain calm and to prepare for his inauguration in January. And he wants Jammeh to allow a smooth transfer of power.
I urge him to change his current position and accept the verdict of the people in good faith for the sake of the Gambia, our homeland.
Jammeh is a former military officer who has ruled the Gambia for 22 years. During his time in office, political opponents have disappeared or have been thrown in jail without trial. The country has suffered from economic and political isolation. Jammeh has won all the previous elections his government organized. So it surprised many around the world when he conceded defeat last week in the recent election. His rival Adama Barrow won 45.5% of the vote, while he got 36.7%.
It depends on your calendar. You are the president-elect now. I'm the outgoing president. So you give us time.
For his people and those who know him, pictures of him on the phone congratulating his rival looked promising.
I will never rule this country without your mandate since we started elections. And I will never cheat or dispute the elections, because this is the most transparent, rig-proof elections in the whole world.
Too good to be true was perhaps how Gambians really felt at the time, but they had suppressed it in the hope they might be wrong. They took to the streets to celebrate what appeared to be one of the most peaceful transitions of power in Africa. But with Jammeh now rejecting the very same results he accepted last week, uncertainty and despair will likely return. His move is seen as a possible reaction to demands by some in the opposition that he should be tried for crimes he may have committed while in power. Perhaps more than ever before, the Gambia is on the brink of a dangerous phase of its modern history. Mohammed Val, Al Jazeera.
Well, Yahya Jammeh seized power in a coup in 1994. The devout Muslim claimed to be able to cure AIDS with prayer, a concoction of herbs and a banana. He also claimed to be able to cure female infertility and called for homosexuals to be beheaded. Jammeh is notorious for jailing his political opponents. He won 4 multi-party elections before this month's surprise defeat. The regional body, the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, refused to endorse his election victory in 2011. ECOWAS said that voters and the opposition had suffered what it called repression and intimidation. 3 years ago, Jammeh withdrew Gambia from the Commonwealth, which was pushing for reforms. Loss of membership further isolated the small African country internationally. Human rights groups criticised Jammeh's treatment of journalists. Gambians cast their votes in this latest election during a media blackout. All right, let's get the thoughts of our guests for today. Joining us from the Gambian capital, Banjul, is Halifa Sallah, spokesperson for the President-elect Adama Barrow. From Washington, D.C., we're joined by Jeffrey Smith, Executive Director of Vanguard Africa. And from London, Murtala Touray, who's an independent analyst on West Africa. He's also a former senior analyst at IHS. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Halifa Sallah, we'll start with you. The video isn't particularly great on our Skype link, but we can hear you. What's the President-elect's view of Jammeh's rejection of the election result?
He did issue a statement yesterday indicating very clearly the process that this country has gone through to come up with the results of the 1st December 2016 presidential elections. It is very clear that under the Gambian constitution, a person elected has a 5-year term, and 3 months before the end of that term, we should have elections. And elections has taken place. The only authority responsible for announcing results is the Independent Electoral Commission. They have done that, and President-elect Barrow is determined to be the victor of the elections. Fortunately...
So, am I right, just to clear something up, am I right in thinking that the current president, the incumbent, does have the right to contest the election result?
Well, what is very clear is that once an election result is declared, that stands. The only other authority that can look into the validity of the elections is the Supreme Court, which means that you have to file an election petition. What is abundantly clear is his announcement rejecting the results is immaterial, in the sense that you can accept or reject results of an election, but the results stand, unless it is questioned before the courts. So his pronouncement that the results were invalid and that we will have future elections has no legal foundation, no constitutional foundation. And that's precisely what President-elect Barrow said, that his pronouncement is just an opinion, has no legal foundation. He is President-elect. Jammeh should serve, outgoing President Jammeh should serve the rest of his term. And in January, he is going to assume office as the President of the Republic of the Gambia. It's called on all members of the public to go about their business and leave outgoing President Jammeh to serve his term and focus their attention on the day of inauguration of the president-elect.
Right. Just one more question, sir. President Jammeh said that a thorough investigation had been conducted since the poll. I mean, how they could have done that in 10 or so days, I don't know, 9 days, in which serious and unacceptable abnormalities in the electoral process had transpired. Could he be right? Do you think, is there any chance that the poll could have been fundamentally flawed?
Well, he has already accepted the results as the verdict of the people and the verdict of God. If he now questions it, well, he is the one, he who asserts must prove. He is the one who should go to the courts and prove his case. He cannot be judge, jury, and complainant at the same time. So I believe that he is someone who should go to the court if he is aggrieved. What is important is to know that such assertions over the air has no legal foundation. It should not be made in the first place. He knows where to go if he wants to question the validity of results of elections. As it stands, what we know is that President-elect Barrow is the President-elect of the Gambia, and that has been affirmed by the Independent Electoral Commission, and that cannot be questioned by any other authority except to the courts.
So thank you for being with us on Inside Story. We'll leave it there because the audio and video quality from Banjul are not particularly great. Halifa Sallah, they're the spokesman for the President-elect Adama Barrow. Let's bring in Jeffrey Smith, then in Washington, D.C., Executive Director of Vanguard Africa. Jeffrey, what do you think has happened? What can we read into Jammeh's acceptance of defeat and then several days later his rejection? What do you think has happened?
Well, unfortunately, this turn of events in the Gambia did not surprise many. For many observers of the Gambia, and certainly Gambians themselves, they become accustomed to Yahya Jammeh's erratic behavior over the course of 22 years while he has been in power. I think, as Halifa Sallah said earlier, just a week ago, Yahya Jammeh went on national television. He conceded defeat to President-elect Adama Barrow. Before the election, he said it would be the most transparent election in the history of the world, that Gambia's elections were, in his words, rig-proof. And then a week later, he does a complete U-turn on election results that were not only affirmed by Gambia's own electoral commission, they were affirmed by the Economic Community of West African States and the African Union. So this election has been universally accepted, universally affirmed, except for in the mind of Yahya Jammeh himself. I think several factors are at play here. I think, number one, a key issue here is there's very clearly some fear within Yahya Jammeh himself about being prosecuted for the myriad crimes he has committed over the course of 2 decades. And I think perhaps the opposition, some in the opposition, made a blunder in that regard in terms of making that public before the transition had officially taken place. Secondly, I think there's very clearly something happening within the military. I don't think outgoing President Jammeh would make the statement that he did, saying that the election was somehow rigged against him, if he did not have at least some support in the military. Interestingly, on the day that he announced the U-turn, the day before, actually, he had promoted 49 senior members of the military. It was a big story in the local media. So perhaps there's something going on there in the media. But I think first and foremost, he did have quite a scare put into him by a lot of the rhetoric being thrown around about him being potentially prosecuted.
Let's bring in Murtala Touray then, former senior analyst at IHS, an independent analyst now in West Africa. Murtala, could Jammeh's announcement have been prompted by the prospect of prosecution under a new government? Did the opposition blunder?
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, we must take into account that what is happening in Gambia is unprecedented. It's the first time something like this is happening. So there is no experience about how to go about this peacefully. And then also we should bear in mind that President-elect Adama Barrow didn't win with absolute majority. He won by 45%. So currently Gambia is a divided country, and that should be taken into consideration. And I think some of the factors that drove Jammeh to make a U-turn, it's as well just after he conceded defeat, because Gambia didn't have this kind of experience before. People went to the street jubilating, thinking that Jammeh, the next day, he's out of power, and then we have a new president. So there was a lot of some destruction, bringing down his images, his posters that are littered all over the country, and then there were some kind of attack, reprisal attack, house to house. And then he himself considered that people that were green, that's green is for the party color, APRC, became yellow, which is the opposition. So he became really scared. And then with all these talk about him being held accountable, I think he's fearful that his legacy is at risk. And then he's likely, like I said, he's likely to spend the rest of his time in jail. So he's really fearful. He has his back to the wall, and it's currently it's a dangerous time in the Gambia, and we've seen the rising risk of interstate war, even between Gambia and Senegal, even from the rhetoric from Senegal, that they're going to be forceful with Yahya Jammeh, that Yahya Jammeh should recognize this result, and then there is a likelihood of civil war. So the opposition should not rise to the bait of President Yahya Jammeh. Yeah. They should use non-violent means, and then see that he hand over come January.
Jeffrey Smith, I mean, the opposition has called for people to remain calm, lucid and vigilant and not to retreat. I mean, what happens if the people do take to the streets? Will Jammeh call a state of emergency and what happens then?
Yeah, that's very concerning and a very good question. And I think we should all be vigilant in watching what transpires in Gambia in the coming days. I think, first and foremost, the really important really important factor here, again, is that Jammeh lost the election. President-elect Barrow needs to assume power in January, have a peaceful transition of power according to the Constitution. And on the issue of potential violence, even before the election, those concerns were very high. So the Early Warning Project, for instance, which is a project at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, actually cited Gambia as having the 4th highest statistical increase in the world leading up to the elections in terms of the threat of state-led mass killing. So now with tensions rising once again, I think that is certainly an issue that we need to all be aware of. Importantly, both the African Union, the Economic Community of West African States, and the United Nations issued a joint statement saying that there needs to be a peaceful transition of power, that Yahya Jammeh must step down in accordance with the country's own laws. And secondly, yesterday, the United Nations Security Council unanimously declared the same, all 15 member states, which is very important. So the world is watching, and I think that's very important on a situation like this, where in the past, a lot of these crimes, a lot of violence, and a lot of human rights abuses committed by Jammeh and the regime have gone unnoticed, and that's very different this time around, and I think that's incredibly important.
Murtala Touray, one more question on Jammeh and the Gambia before we widen our discussion. How did he come to lose his grip on power? I mean, did the opposition in the Gambia outsmart him, or did his jailing of the opposition leader Ousseynou Dabo galvanize people against him? What happened?
Yeah, I think there are several contributing factors to it. First of all, I think he was too overconfident that he has the support of the Gambia. And then before the election, he made several changes that have now come to haunt him. Like he changed the electoral laws, barring Ousseynou Dabo from running for the presidency. He set the age at 65. So that's one of the factors why Barrow came in. And then as well, he changed the law to have, instead of having 2-round voting, he made it one simple majority. So if there had been a second round of voting, then probably he would have had the chance of allying with Mama Kandeh, who came third. He's a former member of the APRC, so probably he would have won. So all these factors, and then with the opposition, as well as the Gambian people, they've had enough of Yahya Jammeh excess, and as well as human rights violation, throwing people in jail. So they were really looking forward to change. So all these contributing factors, he himself, with tinkering with the Constitution as well as the electoral laws, that's brought his end.
Well, following the end of the so-called Cold War, democracy was thought to be flourishing across Africa. Now, though, international observers fear that democracy has stalled or is in fact being reversed. A number of authoritarian leaders across Africa hold an iron grip on power. Many are accused of repressing the opposition, of amending laws to extend their rule, and overseeing rubber stamp elections. At least 16 African nations held elections this year. The transfer of power hasn't always been smooth or always led to representative governments. Edgar Lungu was re-elected president in Zambia in August in a poll marred by harassment of the opposition, claims of vote rigging and the closure of an independent newspaper. Disputes too in Gabon following the election there in September. The opposition accused the Constitutional Court of a miscarriage of justice for upholding the victory of President Ali Bongo. And President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda extended his 30-year rule earlier this year in an election which international observers condemned as a sham. Jeffrey Smith, I mean, what does it take to make a positive political transition in Africa possible?
Well, I think that's one of the tragic outcomes of the Gambia. The election result there that was announced on December 2nd, in which it was announced that now President-elect Adama Barrow had ousted one of the continent's longest-serving dictators. It provided hope not only to Gambians but people across the region and across sub-Saharan Africa. Now with this reversal, again, it puts into flux the state of democracy in the region and dashes the hopes of millions across the region. I think if you look more broadly, one of the really interesting aspects in sub-Saharan Africa is the fact that poll after poll shows that citizens across the continent prefer electoral democracy over the alternatives. What is missing, however, is the supply of democracy. So the demand is increasingly high, the hopes and aspirations of people remain high, but the supply of democracy remains woefully low. If you look at Freedom House studies, for instance, only 12% of citizens in sub-Saharan Africa live in a country in which democratic ideals, civil liberties, and political rights are actually protected in practice, which is very concerning. And I think looking at West Africa in particular, in which Gambia is situated, there has been tremendous advancements, in my opinion, in terms of advancing democracy. We saw what happened in Ghana just this week with the opposition candidate ousting the incumbent president, and we know there'll be a peaceful transfer of power there. So in West Africa, specifically, tremendous advancements being made, and again, Gambia is making headlines for all of the wrong reasons, and is really a veritable black eye on a region otherwise doing very well.
Murtala, Touray, we talked about the UN Security Council, the African Union and ECOWAS. The UN Security Council says Jammeh must hand over power without conditional delay. The African Union described his statement as null and void. Are the AU or ECOWAS competent bodies when it comes to the democratic transfer of power in Africa?
ECOWAS, we've seen increasingly making some very strong progress in terms of pushing for stable government and democratic transition. We saw what they did in Mali in 2012 when there was a coup. They stepped in, then prevailed on the military to hand over to a civilian-led transition. And the military, they didn't even stay for a month. We saw the same thing in Burkina Faso last year when the military wanted to disrupt the peaceful transition. They stepped in as well in Guinea-Bissau. So they've had this experience. And I think with that, one can say, probably arguably, that the military regime in West Africa, their days are numbered. In the sense that you can stage a coup, but you won't be allowed to stay in power. I think that's a tremendous progress from the part of ECOWAS. So now ECOWAS, they do have this experience. They have leverage. They have people that can get to Yahya Jammeh. One of these strong men, I think, it's former president of Nigeria. That's Olusegun Obasanjo. He has some levers over Yahya Jammeh. He's some of these people that should be brought in and put this pressure on Yahya Jammeh from now to at the end of December or to, January, so that he can see a reason to hand over power peacefully.
Jeffrey Smith, the average age of Gambia's population is 20. Many people there have known no other leader. I mean, and that demographic is repeated right across West Africa and other parts of the continent. You say demand for democracy is high. To what extent may we see a sort of African version of the Arab Spring, with people demanding democracy, proper, true democracy?
Yeah, I think certainly, as we were talking about previously, the demand for democracy continues to rise. And I think the Arab Spring analogy is a bit overplayed here. I think there's certainly different social and cultural dynamics at play in sub-Saharan Africa that were otherwise evident in North Africa and parts of the Middle East. But one of the concerns here, and pivoting back to Gambia a bit, is the rising tension and the rising frustrations of people who, in Gambia, for instance, went out and stood in line and bravely voted out one of the continent's and arguably one of the world's most repressive dictators. They literally put their lives on the line to do this. And now that that has been taken away, social tensions will certainly increase. And one of the big fears there, too, is that Jammeh, over the past 22 years, has become an expert at dividing people. He has divided people certainly along political lines, along ethnic lines. For instance, before the elections, he threatened to bury the opposition 9 feet deep. Those were his own words. He threatened to kill the Mandinka ethnic group, which makes up about 40% of Gambia's population, threatening to kill them like vermin. He called them ants. So sort of conjuring this very, very horrible rhetoric that we saw in the early 1990s in Rwanda before the genocide happened there. And I'm not saying a genocide is imminent in the Gambia, but these are certainly big concerns that are not only a concern for Gambia and for the region, but certainly for the United States and other vested shareholders in Gambia's future.
Gentlemen, there we must end it. Many thanks indeed for being with us, Jeffrey Smith and Murtala Touray. And thank you, as always, for watching. Don't forget you can see the programme again anytime just by going to aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, join us at our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye for now.